talking about how nervous they were because it was the first day's shooting. It never ended. So John Mills, I welcomed him aboard, and his hand was all wet.
What if the real cost of global escapism has never been measured? For decades, television offered a dream: cruise ships, romance, and eternal sunshine, while the world outside grew colder, lonelier, more disconnected. We've blamed the internet, social media, even modern storytelling. But what if the illusion started much earlier, aboard a ship we all thought we knew? Behind the laughter of the love boat, something unexpected was quietly unraveling. Stories buried, lives altered, truths hidden in plain sight. Now, after years of silence, the cast is speaking out. The Love Boat sets sail with the promise of romance, comedy, and adventure. Every Saturday night, millions tuned in to escape into a floating fantasy. But behind the cheerful jingles and champagne-soaked smiles was a cast navigating far murkier waters. When The Love Boat premiered in 1977, it was marketed as harmless fun, light-hearted escapism with rotating celebrity guests and endless charm. But what audiences didn't see was the intense pressure placed on its ensemble cast to maintain a flawless image, both on and off the screen. The show demanded not just performance, but perfection. Smiling wasn't just encouraged, it was required. And as the ratings soared, so did the expectations. Behind the scenes, the original cast bonded quickly, or so it seemed. Gavin MacLeod, Bernie Kopell, Lauren Tewes, Fred Grandy, and Ted Lange became household names, each stepping into their roles with apparent ease. But something was already cracking beneath the surface. They were being typecast in real time, reduced to caricatures they couldn't escape, trapped in a fantasy that paid the bills but cost something far greater: their autonomy. The studio imposed a strict code of conduct. No public scandals, no messy divorces, no behavior that could disrupt the illusion of the perfect cruise. It was the late 70s, Hollywood's golden gloss era, and anything deemed off-brand was quietly handled or erased. And when the cameras stopped rolling, the cast wasn't allowed to let down their guard. Fans approached them on the street expecting Gopher's goofiness, Isaac's charm, or Julie's endless energy. But they were actors, not avatars, and that contradiction would come to define and damage many of them. Whispers of backstage tension began to surface as early as Season 2. Some say the laughter on set was forced, that the bonds between castmates were professional at best and ice-cold at worst. But the world never saw it. The glossy promotional photos and cheerful interviews painted a picture of paradise, a paradise built on silence, sacrifice, and secrets. No one said it outright, but everyone knew. The Love Boat was not a cruise. It was a machine. And soon, that machine would start to grind down the people at its helm. Gavin MacLeod was the heart of the Love Boat. As Captain Merrill Stubing, he exuded warmth, wisdom, and steady leadership. Viewers saw him as a father figure, guiding passengers and crew through waves of drama and romance. But off-screen, MacLeod was waging a private war, one that began long before he ever set foot on that floating set. Born Alan C. in 1931, MacLeod had already lived a full career before the Love Boat. He'd been in The Mary Tyler Moore Show, McHale's Navy, and dozens of films and TV spots. But his climb had been riddled with insecurity. A receding hairline led him to change his name. Rejection after rejection wore him down. And by the time the Love Boat offered him the captain's hat, Gavin had already hit rock bottom, in both his career and his marriage. What most fans never knew was that when the Love Boat began, Gavin was a recovering alcoholic. Years of quiet drinking had destroyed his first marriage and nearly ended his career. He was broke, alone, and deeply depressed. The show saved him. But sobriety came with its own burdens, especially in an industry drenched in celebration and secrecy. On set, MacLeod became a quiet rock for the others. Many say he was deeply kind, often offering encouragement and spiritual guidance. But that serenity was hard-earned. He leaned heavily on his faith, eventually becoming a born-again Christian. He stopped drinking, reconciled with his wife Patty, and began speaking openly about his past battles. But only later. During the show's run, everything had to be kept quiet. The network couldn't risk tarnishing their captain's image. Even as he brought joy to millions, MacLeod was haunted by what he'd almost lost, and what he had to hide to stay afloat. There's a strange irony in it all. The man who portrayed the stable center of a drifting world was, for many years, drowning. Gavin eventually wrote a memoir. In it, he described the Love Boat as a miracle. But miracles often come with a price. His was invisibility. While everyone loved Captain Stubing, few truly saw Gavin MacLeod, and even fewer knew what he had endured just to keep smiling. Julie McCoy was the sunshine of the Love Boat. Played by Lauren Tewes, the perky cruise director welcomed guests aboard with a sparkle in her eye and boundless enthusiasm. She was the face of fun, the embodiment of possibility. But by the mid-1980s, she was gone, cut from the cast without warning. Fans were confused. The network offered no explanation, and Tewes herself disappeared from public view. Behind that vanishing act was a story of addiction, ambition, and abandonment. Lauren Tewes had landed the role of Julie just 2 days before filming began. She wasn't a known name. She'd been waiting tables, struggling to make ends meet. But the producers saw something in her, a vibrant charm that felt genuine. And for a while, it was. But the pressure to perform, to constantly radiate positivity, began to take its toll. By season 3, Tewes was spiraling. Off-screen, she was battling a cocaine addiction. It wasn't uncommon in Hollywood at the time. Many stars were using. But Lauren was vulnerable. She felt overwhelmed, isolated, and unable to ask for help. The studio noticed. They gave her warnings, ultimatums, and finally, a pink slip. She was let go in 1984, just before the show's final seasons. No farewell episode, no send-off, just gone. The truth came out years later. Tewes admitted to her drug use in interviews, speaking candidly about how fame had swallowed her whole. She sought treatment and eventually recovered, but the damage had been done. Hollywood didn't forgive easily. She never again achieved the same level of success. There's a cruel twist in Lauren's story. As Julie, she had to help others find their happiness. But when she needed help, no one reached back. She became a cautionary tale, then a footnote, but she wasn't finished. Years later, Tewes returned to acting, this time in smaller roles and regional theater. She also became a trained chef, finding solace in the quiet, grounded work of cooking. She rebuilt her life, piece by piece, still smiling, but this time on her own terms. Julie McCoy disappeared from the Love Boat, but Lauren Tewes never truly left. She simply had to find a new way to sail forward. Dr. Adam Bricker was smooth, too smooth, some would say. Played by Bernie Kopell, the ship's flirtatious physician offered medical advice and awkward pickup lines in equal measure. He was the punchline, the bachelor never quite getting the girl, but always trying. For viewers, Doc was a harmless comic relief. But off-screen, Bernie Kopell was fighting to be taken seriously in a town that had already decided who he was. Before the Love Boat, Kopell was a working actor with a reputation for versatility. He'd played roles on Get Smart, Bewitched, and That Girl, often donning fake accents and disguises, but the part of Doc Bricker, seemingly simple, became both a blessing and a curse. The role gave him fame, but it also locked him in a persona he couldn't shake. Kopell didn't love playing the pervy ship doctor. In fact, he resented it. He'd trained in classical theater, performed Chekhov and Shakespeare, but Hollywood only saw him as the horny guy in the white coat. And the longer the show ran, the deeper that box closed in on him. There were other tensions behind the scenes. Kopell was older than most of the cast and had been in the business for decades. He was deeply professional, punctual, meticulous, and a stickler for detail. That didn't always sit well with the younger stars, especially as fame inflated egos. Rumors swirled that he clashed with producers over lazy writing and once nearly walked off set after an especially ridiculous plotline involving a chimpanzee. But the real gut punch came after the show ended. While others found new roles, Bernie couldn't get auditions. He was Doc now, and that was all he'd ever be. The phone stopped ringing. The producers moved on. Bernie felt abandoned. "They loved me until they didn't," he once said in an interview, "and then I was invisible." For a time, he considered quitting the business altogether. But then came the irony. As the show became a syndicated staple, new generations discovered The Love Boat. Suddenly, Bernie was famous all over again, but still only as Doc. So he leaned in. He started doing comedy clubs, roasts, even cruise ship appearances. He made peace with the character that had caged him. Because while it trapped him professionally, it had also paid for his house, his children's education, and more. Bernie Kopell is still acting today, often in nostalgic cameos or self-referential roles. He's learned to laugh with the joke, but you can still hear the sting when he talks about the early 90s, that quiet era after the show ended, when Hollywood forgot who he was. Doc Bricker might have been the ship's eternal optimist, but Bernie Kopell knew what it meant to feel discarded by the very machine he helped build. Ted Lange's smile lit up Saturday nights. As Isaac Washington, the ship's endlessly charismatic bartender, he poured drinks, offered advice, and cracked jokes with effortless ease. Viewers adored him. He was the soul of the Love Boat, warm, dependable, and undeniably cool. But behind that iconic mustache and ever-present grin, Lange carried the burden of being the show's only black regular cast member, and everything that came with it. Ted Lange was no token. He was a classically trained actor, educated at San Francisco City College, and later at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London. But on The Love Boat, he was rarely given the same emotional arcs or spotlight as his white co-stars. He noticed. So did others. In interviews years later, Lange admitted he often had to advocate for himself just to get lines with substance. The scripts gave him punchlines, but not storylines. Isaac rarely had a love interest, and when he did, it was fleeting. There was no character development, no depth, just a smile, a joke, a cocktail. He once asked a producer why Isaac couldn't have a serious romantic arc. The answer? We don't want to make the audience uncomfortable. It was a sobering reminder of the limitations placed on black actors in 1980s network television. Representation had come with restrictions. Lange didn't complain publicly. Instead, he started writing. In secret, he began crafting his own scripts, stage plays, screenplays, even episodes of the show. He directed theater in his off time and earned a reputation as a serious creative force. But none of that made it to the screen during the Love Boat's run. He was Isaac, only Isaac, and that was all producers wanted. But perhaps the most painful blow came when a spin-off idea featuring Isaac was pitched and rejected. The network didn't think America would tune in to a black lead from a secondary character. That rejection hit hard. Not because Lange wanted stardom, but because he'd earned it, and it had been denied. Still, Ted Lange endured. He stayed with the show until the end, became a fan favorite, and even directed several episodes, though few realized it at the time. After The Love Boat, he turned fully to directing and writing, earning accolades in theater and television. Isaac's smile was real, but it was also armor, a necessary mask in a system that celebrated diversity as long as it stayed quiet. Lange kept smiling, but he never stopped pushing. Over 500 guest stars walked the decks of The Love Boat. From faded legends to rising stars, the show became a revolving door for Hollywood's curious, hopeful, and desperate. But behind those glittering cameos were stories of bitter rivalries, last chances, and silent scandals that never made it past the final cut. Many of the guests were brought in not for their talent, but for their names. It was stunt casting at its most blatant. A washed-up crooner, perfect for a romantic subplot. A sitcom has-been. Give them a redemption arc. But what the audience never saw was how some of these guests arrived already broken, bankrupt, addicted, desperate for a paycheck or a career resurrection. In one particularly infamous episode, a former teen heartthrob showed up so intoxicated he couldn't remember his lines. Production was delayed, tensions ran high, and Gavin MacLeod, ever the peacemaker, personally intervened to get him off the set, without press involvement. That actor was quietly replaced, his footage erased. The incident never leaked. Until now. Then there were the contractual battles. Some stars demanded top billing, causing friction with the main cast. Others insisted on rewriting their own scenes. One Oscar-winning actress refused to be touched on camera and brought her own lighting team. The producers gave in, because the name meant ratings, and ratings meant survival. But not all tensions stayed behind closed doors. Fred Grandy, who played the lovable gopher, once clashed publicly with a guest star over a political joke made during filming. The studio hushed it up, but insiders say it nearly led to Grandy walking off the show entirely. There were also whispered romances, some real, others fabricated for publicity. Tabloids hinted at on-set affairs, though few were ever confirmed. But what was true was this: the revolving door of guest stars made continuity impossible. Friendships were fleeting. Trust was rare. And for the regular cast, the parade of unfamiliar faces added to the growing sense of isolation. As the show entered its later seasons, the quality of guest stars declined. Once hailed as a prestigious gig, the Love Boat became something else, a landing pad for those on their way down. Viewers saw glamour, the cast saw desperation, and beneath the glitter, there was always something quietly sinking. Every cruise has a destination. For the Love Boat, it was a world without consequence. No matter the problem, a broken heart, a lost job, a mistaken identity, it would all be fixed in time for the final credits. But behind the scenes, the ship's course was far from smooth. Because the Love Boat wasn't just a set, it was a sealed vessel, drifting in its own strange reality, one built on buried truths and fragile facades. Production of the show was unlike anything else on television at the time. Filming often took place on actual cruise ships, including the Pacific Princess. The real crew had to make space for the actors, the camera operators, and the elaborate lighting rigs. It made for beautiful scenery, but also endless tension. The cast was often isolated. They spent days at sea with little contact from the outside world. When they weren't filming, they were stuck together, eating, sleeping, and rehearsing in tight quarters. For some, the forced proximity bred camaraderie. For others, it bred resentment. There was no escape from the pressure to perform, or from the unspoken power dynamics that governed everything. Producers operated with a simple rule: appearances are everything. If an actor was struggling, emotionally, physically, or professionally, it was to be hidden at all costs. Illness, delay filming, personal crisis, rewrite the scene. One actor once collapsed from exhaustion after a night of filming followed by a press junket. The studio quietly dispatched a doctor and canceled the interviews. The fans never heard a word. And then there was the issue of control. Scripts were tightly regulated. Ad-libbing was discouraged. Actors who wanted deeper material or more meaningful arcs were met with a smile, and a rewritten script that erased their request. Lauren Tewes, before her dismissal, had begged for a storyline about Julie's mental health. The producers laughed. "Julie's happy," they said. "That's the whole point." Behind the jokes and champagne toasts was a culture of suppression. Real issues, race, addiction, identity, power, were scrubbed clean. It was a fantasy, after all, one that had to stay afloat no matter what. Even among the cast, secrets piled up. Romantic entanglements were hidden. Pay disputes simmered beneath the surface. Some actors found themselves pitted against each other by network executives looking to maintain control. Friendships fractured quietly. Resentments hardened. The Pacific Princess may have looked like paradise, but it was also a pressure cooker. And over time, the smiling faces began to crack. What the Love Boat sold was escapism. What it hid was the cost of maintaining that illusion. A ship built on secrets can only sail for so long before it starts to sink. For all its make-believe, some moments on the Love Boat were painfully real. Beneath the scripts, beyond the camera angles, the cast lived their own stories of love, heartbreak, and grief. Stories the audience never saw, and the network never acknowledged. Fred Grandy, the affable gopher, had a secret ambition that startled many. He wanted out. Unlike his co-stars, Grandy didn't dream of a long Hollywood career. His passion was politics. While playing the comic relief on a weekly romantic cruise, he was quietly earning degrees, building networks, and preparing for a second act. After the show ended, he ran for Congress and won. But his departure from acting wasn't just about ambition. Grandy later revealed that the grind of the series had left him emotionally drained. The scripts were formulaic, the laughs predictable. He felt, in his words, like a clown trapped in a loop. When his real-life father passed away during the show's run, Grandy took only a few days off. The network pressured him to return. The cruise couldn't wait. Then there was Gavin MacLeod. While the world saw the wise Captain Stubing, he was grieving personal losses too. His mother died quietly between seasons. A friend of his died of suicide. And though he rarely spoke of it, he admitted to carrying a deep sadness throughout the final seasons. The show had become his sanctuary, but also his prison. For Lauren Tewes, the hardest part wasn't just the dismissal, it was what followed. She lost her home. She battled through treatment with little support from the industry. At her lowest, she worked in catering to make ends meet, all while fans sent letters asking why Julie wasn't smiling anymore. Ted Lange once said that laughter is a mask we wear to survive. On the Love Boat, it was more than a mask. It was armor. The network insisted on happy endings, even when real life was unraveling just out of frame. The most haunting example came not from the cast, but from the Pacific Princess herself. After the show ended, the real cruise ship that had hosted so many episodes was sold and quietly deteriorated. Years later, she was sent to a scrapyard in Turkey, cut apart piece by piece. Photos surfaced online. Rusted metal, broken decks, a hollow shell of what once symbolized escape and joy. It was a cruel metaphor. The fantasy didn't just end, it was dismantled. The smiles were real, but so were the losses they hid. And in the quiet after the laughter, what lingered most was grief. By the mid-1980s, the tide had turned. Ratings were slipping. The stories had grown tired. Even the once exciting guest stars felt recycled. The Love Boat, once unsinkable, was losing steam. But instead of a graceful goodbye, the show drifted aimlessly toward its end, clinging to the illusion of eternal joy even as the anchor dragged beneath. The network refused to announce a final season. Instead, episodes were cut, shuffled, and aired without warning. The cast had no closure, no farewell party, no final cruise, just silence. Lauren Tewes was long gone. Bernie Kopell had resigned himself to the role. Gavin MacLeod continued to smile, even as his lines shrank. Fred Grandy was already eyeing politics. Ted Lange? He was quietly directing. And then came the final blow. In 1986, without warning, the studio canceled the series. The cast found out not through an official announcement, but through a terse memo and a call sheet that simply never arrived. After 9 seasons, 249 episodes, and over 1,000 guest stars, the fantasy was over. There was no final episode, no teary goodbye, just a quiet, unceremonious dock. The aftermath was jarring. Gavin MacLeod went into a deep depression. He'd poured his soul into Captain Stubing, and suddenly, there was no one calling him Captain anymore. He later described those months as a death with no funeral. Fred Grandy won a congressional seat in Iowa. Bernie Kopell took guest roles where he could, often parodying Doc Bricker. Lauren Tewes recovered, but never fully returned to Hollywood. Ted Lange found new life in theater, But even he admitted the end of the show left him feeling disposable. The Pacific Princess herself was renamed, then sold, then scrapped. A floating symbol of joy, reduced to rust and memory. And the fans? They kept watching the reruns, kept writing letters, kept asking why no one ever said goodbye. Because sometimes the end isn't clean. It's a slow fade, a final voyage no one wanted, but everyone had to take. Today, the Love Boat is remembered fondly. A time capsule of late 70s optimism, a comfort show, a kitschy, glamorous escape from reality. But beneath the glitz was something far more fragile. A cast of actors who gave everything they had to keep the illusion afloat, even as the weight of it pulled them under. The show broke barriers. Yes, it gave visibility to older actors, interracial couples, and even non-traditional love stories. But it also perpetuated sanitized fantasies that left no room for real emotion, real struggle, or real growth. The actors were props in a paradise they didn't control. Yet somehow, they endured. Ted Lange still performs. Bernie Kopell still acts. Fred Grandy still speaks on public issues. Lauren Tewes found peace. Gavin MacLeod passed away in 2021, but not before receiving decades of letters from fans thanking him for guiding them through tough times. The truth is, The Love Boat wasn't just a show. It was a mirror of what Hollywood wanted the world to believe, that love always wins, that every heartbreak can be healed in an hour, that life is beautiful and simple and fair. But the cast knew better. They knew what it cost to smile on cue. They knew what it meant to be forgotten after the final take. They knew the price of a perfect illusion. And maybe that's the real story. Not the guest stars, not the romance, but the quiet, unseen resilience of those who sailed through the storm, alone, unseen, but still standing. The ship has sailed, but the truth, it lingers. If even a show built on joy and connection hid so much pain beneath the surface, what else have we been too eager to believe? The truth is out. But will we choose to see it and speak it before it's too late? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.